My name is Mike Sadler, and I've spent my life with cars. Whether it's sand dunes and drag strips, museums, car shows, even the backyard garage, I'm always on the lookout for speed and shine. Hey, welcome back. In today's episode, we're going to visit one of the world's most significant historical sites. It's where it all began. Check it out. Well, I'm really excited today. I am at the Ford Piquette Museum with Steve Shotwell, and this is where it all began.
This is it. Yeah, this is a Ford Motor Company at its purest beginnings.
As a Ford guy, I'm really excited to be here. I've never been here before, and it's going to be great. Where would you suggest we go first?
Well, let's start in Henry Ford's office. It's close by, and we've already restored that room, so let's take a peek.
All right, let's take a look.
This room right here is so significant. It's significant because of the things that are inside of the room. Mm-hmm. Henry was known not to spend very much time here. Mm-hmm. Although you will notice that there's a change over here that he would, because he would sleep here sometimes.
Really?
Yes, he spent a lot of hours here. Mm. But probably one of the biggest things that people are interested in is this mammoth safe that's behind you.
Yeah.
Right? That safe is never had money in it. It's kind of interesting. There was a safe downstairs that had money in it, and at this point in time, 1904 through 1910 is the time period for this particular facility. It was all cash basis. So downstairs where the accounting office was, the safe is down there for that. This was drawings. Henry was such a fuss bucket, is the word that I use, about making sure that everything is drawn to infinite detail.
Okay.
And here was the motivation for that. A lot of these early car companies were having multiple people make some of their components. They didn't come out the same. So if somebody needed a replacement part, it became a real challenge, okay?
Almost recreating it again.
Exactly. So instead, what Henry did, and he actually brought this over from Europe, because Europe was doing a great job of doing incredible details on anything that they were manufacturing. So he followed that rule, even to the point of sending people to Europe to see what measuring instruments they used, how they documented, etc. All that information was housed inside of this safe.
So that was the most valuable thing to him.
It was, plus these drawings, especially when we start talking about the prototypes. In this building, there were almost 10 different automobiles that were designed and built. And those automobiles and those drawings about were something that he held very close, for security reasons, as well as others. So that particular safe was something that was pretty well known as holding the real treasures for early Ford Motor Company.
Value, yeah.
And we see a variety of other things inside of the room too. I mean, a desk that was comfortable, not overly large, and whatever, and a nice comfortable chair. But I'd like you to notice to your right over here, Mike, that there's a telescope. And automobiles and telescopes don't exactly fit together, but this is where we need to find out some things about Henry and his life and his wife. Clara, his wife, the two of them just absolutely loved the outdoors. They loved birds, and this was a place where Henry could indeed look for some of those birds, etc., inside of here. And that's when we know that telescope existed, because over here we have a picture of Henry in his office, and you'll see the telescope is clearly pictured over there, and you'll be able to see the safe in the background and a variety of other things that are interesting inside the room. As long as we're here, take a look at the wonderful picture that you see behind us. That picture includes photographs of the people who were inventing cars in this time period, early 1900s, okay?
Wow.
And you'll see that Henry Ford happens to be right in the very middle of it. And downstairs in James Couzens' office is that same picture, okay? This was kind of the esteemed group of people that were working so hard here in the greater Detroit area to advance the automobile and to build the automobiles of their dreams and visions.
Amazing.
It's a very, very exciting place. As we look around the room, you'll see that, you know, the wallpaper and the linoleum and the carpeting, all these are things that were carefully recreated using the photographs that we have here. It so happens we have probably about 20 plus photographs of this facility in that time period, 1904 through 1910. Most of them were taken in 1908. We know that on June 16th of 1908, there were a lot of pictures that were taken here because we have a lot of calendars that are in the background that lets us know. And we also know that this building wasn't the same, under the same usage year after year. It migrated because as other things were happening, they would find that let's enhance that particular area of the building. So for example, the draftsmen were upstairs on the 3rd floor for ages, and we know that they moved to other places when it was more strategic for them. Henry always wanted to be close by with those people.
And I would imagine at the time that he was working in this office, there would have been nothing else outside.
Very little.
Right.
This area, matter of fact, was residential,
Okay.
Which is amazing. And we have some wonderful maps that show us that. They're insurance maps, actually, because insurance companies did a pretty good job of documenting not just the homes, but the buildings that are here for obvious reasons. And as we look at this area, Ford was one of the very first to move into it and start the industrialization of it. We're inside of an area called Milwaukee Junction. It's only about 3.5 square miles, but there were 11 different car manufacturers that were assembling cars here. There were about 25 different industries that were making parts for cars, radiators and pulleys and wheels and things of that nature. All those things happened in this very area. So when we hear about Detroit being the great city, the great motor city capital of the world, we need to know that this is the place that actually started.
Wow.
So all these industries then started growing after that. Henry's business here started in 1904, and there were hardly any other businesses that were in the local area at the time. So it was something really, really significant for him to move here. What was the motivation? Probably as much as anything, the railroad that was directly on the north part of this building. It so happened that there was a spur that they had built that comes right off of the major railroads. There's 4 different railroads that all blend right here, and that's why they call it Milwaukee Junction, because these railroads came together. And that gave Henry the opportunity to leverage railroads for their different advantages. Some of these railroads went to the northern part of the state. Some of them went to Chicago. Some of these went out east. Some of them even went to Canada. So there was the opportunity that he could utilize the railroad that was going to be most effective for what he needed.
Great. Fantastic. So where should we go next?
I think it'd be smart for us to take a look at the multitude of cars that were all made before the Model T. Most people think the Model T was his first car. It wasn't even close. Let's go take a look at them. We call them the alphabet cars. And you're going to learn that he started with the letter A, not the letter A most of us know, but the letter A, and it's going to go all the way marching up to the letter T. So let's take a look at it.
All right, let's go. All right, Stephen, this first one?
Yes, this is Henry's Model A. A lot of people think of Model A, oh, I've seen Model A's before, but that's the 1928 through 1931 Model A. This is his 1903 Model A. Not made here at Piquette. They moved here in 1904. In 1903, they were at the Piquette Avenue Plant, which is a couple miles from here. A small rental building they had, and business was good. They introduced this car. And they sold enough that they could see that there was high interest, in the car, definitely that way. And the car has a lot of interesting things to it. The engine is actually underneath the seat. And I opened this door over here so you can kind of see a little bit of it. It's called a boxer engine. And the reason for it is it has 2 cylinders and they actually go this way. We're accustomed to seeing cylinders going up and down.
Yep.
In this particular case, they go sideways. And that's why you'll see that there's a crank over there on that far side of the car that underneath the seat where you'd crank it rather than in the front like we normally would. You'll see a radiator over here in front and a large headlight, by itself. The car is actually a 2-seater car, but notice that this one has 4 seats. There's a couple seats in the back. It's called a tonneau.
Okay.
We know the name tonneau, don't we? Because it's popular in pickup trucks. We see tonneau covers, etc. And that was an adaptation that you could get for this car, and it added a couple of extra seats. There's a door in the back. And notice that instead of a trunk, we have these baskets. Those were accessories too. This car, the base car, sold for $900. It's only 8 horsepower. And they sold pretty well. They were good enough quantities that Ford Motor Company knew that they were onto something in terms of something that the market was really, really interested in. The issue was, though, that at only 8 horsepower, it really didn't have enough muscle to it to go up mountains and major hills. But in the state of Michigan, it was awesome.
Sure.
But they were selling them a lot of other places as well. But I think the users definitely were interested in something a little bit more powerful. We're going to take a quick look at the back of the car because that's where we're going to point out that this is a chain-driven car, low horsepower, okay, and very, very lightweight, okay, about 1,200 pounds. And that allowed it to have a chain-driven kind of thing. And that in its day was considered to be one of the smart things to do. We're going to change that as we get into some of these other cars. So what we have here is this open chain that you'll see. But that's a real problem, because there weren't any paved roads when this car was made in 1903. So you can imagine what's going to happen with an open chain like this, with all the brush and the trees and everything else, and mud and everything else. So this was something that was a real challenge that was coming out with the car that they had to deal with. Now we're going to see a torque tube, drive shaft as we'd typically call it, coming out in some of the other cars that we're going to be taking a look at. But generally those are the cars a little bit heavier, okay?
Right.
Heavier as also more horsepower, because that mandated that they had to get away from this chain concept.
Wouldn't hold up.
Exactly. Not the best idea, okay?
It was a start.
You got it.
All right.
So we're now in front of a Model B. We're talking about Model A, Model B. This vehicle was made here in part, as well as made in some other local factories that were using it. And what it does is, it's a heavy car. The engine's in the front. It has a 4-cylinder engine, total antithesis of what we were looking at in that Model A in terms of a style of a car. And this car was mandated by a particular board member for the Ford Motor Company. And it so happens he was the biggest investor in Ford Motor Company. So he had a little bit of weight to swing around.
Sure.
He wanted Ford Motor Company to build cars for rich people. Most of the competitors were doing that already, okay? This is when Cadillac started and Olds and some of these others, and certainly Benz in Germany were all making cars. And the people that really could afford to buy them were the rich people. So it's not a bad marketing scheme to make something for rich people. But Henry had this dream, this vision, that he really wanted to make cars for all of mankind. I mean, we know that, we've seen that. And most of the other manufacturers say, that's not for me. But, so Malcolmson, that was the investor, okay, he insisted, and indeed this car was produced. It was an expensive car. You're looking at a $2,000 car versus a $900 car that you see over there. Yes, it is. And it has enough horsepower that it could actually, easily carry 4 people. But it took a lot of money to be able to get it, and immediately a lot of the market that Henry was interested in wasn't capable of looking at a car like this. So here we are with a Model C. The Model C was made in 1905, and it has an engine underneath the seat, very similar to what we saw in that Model A. It's chain driven in the back, same way that was. But the engine now goes from 8 horsepower to 10 horsepower. Again, recognizing that they need to have a little bit beefier car for people. This car sold actually really, really well. They sold about 1,600 of these altogether. And it really helped stimulate, the economy inside of Ford Motor Company so they could see that they were on that right track. They knew that there were some other things they still needed to do. You notice on these cars, you don't really see a roof that's there. That was an added accessory. This one over here directly in front of us, Mike, you'll see there's some little stirrups there.
I see that.
And those stirrups are to take an accessory roof that would be on side of it. But all these are open cars so far.
Yeah.
And right now, here we are in Michigan. This is the month of January, so it happens right now, and it's cold. And so the market for these in the wintertime went down, and in the summertime it went way up because people want to be outside and enjoying life, etc. It looks like there's an engine in the front right here. If you look, there's a radiator here, and that's what's interesting is there's a radiator and a gas tank inside of that space, and that's why there's a door that you can lift and open and put both of those, services into the car.
These are a little more sporty than that other one.
A little bit more sporty, yeah, you'll see it. But some of the very, very same concepts, are inside of here. What's interesting is they actually made an AC as well. That has some blending of some parts from the Model A and the C together. And basically what they were trying to do is take that 10 horsepower motor and stick it inside of some of these other cars that were going on. So let's take a look at the next one. And what's interesting in the next car, you'd think, okay, here's an A, B, C, so naturally the next one is going to be a Model F. We're going to skip D and E. There was never a D and E that was actually produced for production. The belief was there were a Model D and a Model E that were created as prototypes, but never made it to the production level. But we're going to see the Model F next, and you'll see some of the things that are going to be the evolution of these cars as well. So with us now is this Model F. As we mentioned, we skipped the Model D and the Model E.
Right.
The Model F, still engine underneath the seat. We're going to go from an 8 to a 10. Yep, it goes to a 12 horsepower motor. Still this boxer engine that's going sideways, still the chain driven in the back. Goes up to a little bit more than 1,200 pounds, all together. And this car here, they made more than 5,000 of these cars. So you can see the interest that's out there.
It's growing.
Yeah, the car itself is selling for around $1,200. So unfortunately, it wasn't going down like these others, but it's a little bit beefier car, a much heavier car, and it's a little bit more well suited for the hills and valleys that we see, in the United States. So it was a lot more interest in that. Still the same as the Model C, we have this little door that opens on the hood, and it allows us to get at the gas tank and the radiator. What's really interesting, if you don't mind handing me this picture, is that here's a picture, and most of us know that Henry and Clara had a son named Edsel. And back in this time period, this is 1905 still, okay, you didn't have to have a driver's license. Matter of fact, they didn't even have license plates in Michigan yet. That's going to come up in 1910. And here's a picture of Henry and Edsel inside of the car, and actually Edsel had his own Model F that he would drive. And we have some wonderful pictures of him driving it in the wintertime here in Michigan with a rope behind it, because his friends just loved to jump on their sleds and their skis, and he would tow them around the streets in this basic area that's around here.
Wow.
So it's a kind of a fun thing about how our culture has really changed now that we have driver's licenses and regulations and license plates and all that kind of stuff. But back when Edsel was young, he was having a lot of fun.
I envisioned, that stuff all came from the first two cars that ever met, probably crashed into each other, and they had to figure out what to do next, right?
I bet you that was part of it. What's interesting is a lot of the laws even came from other states that started to be imposed. Pennsylvania was pretty well known for laws that they made for automobiles so that people could exist. What's interesting is in Detroit, and this goes back to the early days, it was a law in the books that said if you had an automobile and you're driving it at night, somebody has to walk in front of you by 50 feet with a lantern so that people could see that you're coming. You can see how times have changed.
Yeah, could you imagine asking your wife to get out and walk in front of the car while you're driving?
I don't think it would be her walking in front.
That's right.
So here we are, Mike, in front of a Model N. The Model N is probably one of the most important cars that's in this whole facility.
Really?
Yes, it was made in 1906.
Okay.
And indeed, it has a 4-cylinder engine underneath that hood. Indeed, it has a torque tube, drive shaft,
All right.
going, to a universal area there that distributes the power to both wheels. And this vehicle reached its notoriety because it was introduced at $500.
Wow.
The National Auto Show at this point is not in Detroit, it's in New York City. Henry takes this car to New York and introduces it, and all the competitors look at it and say, you can't make that car for $500. And you know what? They were right. Henry was actually losing money on it. And eventually, before the end of 1906, the price goes up to $600. But what happens to this car? It becomes the #1 selling car in the United States. It is moving up to 15 horsepower.
Big jump.
At $500 or $600, depending on how we want to look at it, that is a really, really strong value. It's an engine that's up in front. It even has a little bit of vanadium steel in it. You're going to hear about vanadium steel, which is really something we give tribute as being a feature in the Model T, but he starts introducing vanadium steel. Why vanadium? Because they discovered that adding vanadium to regular steel that we would have does a significant thing in 2 ways. It makes the steel stronger and lighter. And everybody wants to keep their cars light because that's one of those things that competing with that horsepower. We want to make sure we have that maximum ability to be able to drive the car and enjoy it and go on hills. This car can handle hills and mostly mountains, okay, to some degree.
Sure.
It's a 2-seater car, but what's really interesting about this car, and this is something that you're going to see even in modern day cars, they're going to take a base car now and introduce 2 more vehicles that are the same engine, the same chassis, the same wheels, everything else, but they're going to trim it out a little bit nicer and charge more money. We're going to take a look at those a little bit. But let's take a look right now over here. I think you were noticing, Mike,
Yeah.
What do you see there?
The Ford logo starting to show up on the car in the front there.
It is, and we haven't seen that on the previous cars. So on this radiator, but do you notice anything else unusual, Mike, about that?
Well, it's got some extra,
It's gonna,
mustache or whatever.
yeah, that's what we call that the mustache. Okay, that's one of the phrases, or the wings that would be there. And what's really interesting is that logo, the base logo in the middle, is the same Ford logo that we've been accustomed to for seeing for many years. But those wings or that mustache are indicative that it's a car that's made here at Piquette. So what's going to happen is once this inventory moves over to the Highland Park plant, the monster facility, to build Model Ts over there, that mustache falls off or the wings fall off. And so that's a nice way to see. So if somebody has a very early car, if they don't have that mustache on there, we know that it's they need to look at their radiator and change it.
Well, our viewers now know something that other people don't, right? So when they see a car at a car show, they can tell somebody where that was made.
Absolutely, yes, yes. You'll also see in the front here that it's kind of interesting. You'll see the crankshaft is now in the front because the engine's in the front. And behind the crankshaft, there's this big brass thing. That's actually the water pump that's down there. And that water pump is the way that it circulates. So the handle of the crank goes right through the radiator, so does the water pump, And it's they're going to change that once they get to the Model T, but it's kind of an interesting way to make it all work it out. The logistics, they worked out pretty well.
Well, at least for once it was someplace easy to get to replace it.
There you go. That works well. So, Mike, now we're taking a look at a Model R. As I'd already shared with you, it's really a Model N that's been prettied up. Notice it has running boards. Over there on that Model N, they didn't have running boards. It was just a little foot pad that you would step into. It has a lot more brass on it. It's a nicer looking car. So probably somebody that has a little bit more money, maybe a professional person, etc., would be interested in a car like this. You'll see that there's a place for a windshield on this. So back on the Model N, we saw that. These are all done with the little clips that are there that'll hold it down. Not a very good winter car, but it's a little bit snazzier to do. You'll also see the color of this is green. That's a Brewster green, is what they called it in its day.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, and you also see the pinstriping on it. Back there on the Model N, we didn't see that pinstriping. So those are the kind of details that you're going to get for that extra $250. Now, at $750, they could make money on this car.
Yeah.
Because those other accoutrements that you have didn't really add that much to the price.
The options.
Yep. So let's take a look at a Model S. And you're going to say, sure looks like a Model R. Let's take a look. Okay. Yeah, it does look like a Model R, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay. But this is a Model S. This was produced a little bit later on in 1907. Again, on the same line, it's a $700 car instead of a $750 car. And if you look at it, it's almost hard to tell what the nuances are between one versus the other. They changed a little bit in the seats and the padding that you'll see there, a couple other very small things, but they knew that they were successful in making this whole Model N, R, and S line, and this is the way that they decided to introduce another car, and maybe they could capture another little plateau of buyer, for it. So now we're going to take these two cars, and we're going to take a look at them before they were restored, because right next to us here, we have a Model R and a Model S that are totally unrestored, and we're going to learn some neat things about these cars. So you'll see really what these cars have gone through to be able to look so nice, but there's some neat things that we can learn from these cars. Let's take a look.
Okay.
We are. This one happens to be a Model S, and this particular car was red. It's never been painted again, and this is where we learn some neat things about paint. Lacquer paint, which is what everybody was using back in these days, was a fine paint. By the way, today we wouldn't use lacquer. It has a lot of health risks that are involved with it, etc. And we use some modern paints now that are going to last a lot longer because we've learned that, throughout the years. But this car here doesn't look red at all. It looks like it's very black, as a matter of fact. All cars painted with the lacquer paint turn to black or some really, really dark color because they didn't have the UV ultraviolet protection that we have in the modern day paints that are there. But you'll see the pinstriping that's on here, some other kinds of real things that are neat. But one of the things I wanted to point out is the engine with this car. All the Model N's, R's, and S's, and the SR as well, okay, all use this two-cylinder pocket for an engine and another two-cylinder, so it's a four-cylinder engine, but there's no removable head. None of these cars so far have had removable heads to them. When we get to the Model T, that's something we're going to talk about because that's one of the 5 big steps that are here. These engines, what they had to do is they had to pour it as a casting, and then they would drill out with these monster-sized drills the place for the pistons to be in or the valves to be in. And that's why up in the top here, you'd be able to see a lot of these mechanical things that are attached because valves are something you have to be able to get at to maintain them or even install them from the get-go. What we would like to do is, you and I are going to peek in the back here for a second because this car is perfect for looking at pinstriping.
Oh,
Let's take a look.
all right.
So this car, again, was originally red. You can see a little reddish hue up inside of here. But notice the pinstriping. This actually has a double pinstripe in it. There's a black line and a gold line, and that extends through this entire vehicle. The amount of calories or time that it took to be able to do this was really, really pretty profound. This seat is really kind of interesting too. This car is a two-seater car, but they added this other seat here, and this has a special name to it. Do you know what this is called, Mike?
Mother-in-law seat?
It's a mother-in-law seat. Yes, exactly. You can see up here they actually had a place where they could install a small roof on it, but notice there's no roof over this mother-in-law seat. Okay. What's interesting is this seat actually lifts off, the top of it pivots off, and it's a tool box as well underneath. So this car is perfect, and whenever we have photographers coming in to the museum, I love to take them to this because I like to show them this detail that we have here. Even the wheels were all pinstriped, etc. It just made it absolutely a gorgeous car in its day.
So probably when this one was original, this was one of the more expensive ones, you think?
Probably was, yes. This wasn't the $500 or $600 base Model N. This car was more in the $700 to $750 range. So here we are now at the Model T. The Model T was actually designed here inside of this factory in the secret experimental room, which is up on the 3rd floor.
Wow.
It's a neat place to visit. The Model T, once it hit, they didn't make all the rest of these other cars. There were times when, as I mentioned earlier, you could buy 3 or 4 different models of cars. When they went to the Model T, this was it. It has inside of it a 22 horsepower engine. It has other kinds of things in it that really make it outstanding. It's actually sold as a family car. This is what's called a touring car in terms of the model. They did have just one with a front seat in it that was a runabout, but this one has a back, and most of the cars they sold were that way because people were interested in something they could take the entire family, out in. Now, they say that 3 people can sit in the back, and I usually say 3 people, one of them is going to be smaller.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yep.
Or certainly if you had 3 kids, it'll be perfect, inside of there. There's wonderful pictures of families riding around in their Model T. This is the car that's going to change everything in the world. It's going to mobilize people. Yes, you can go up hills. I drive a Model T. I drive a 1916 Model T, and I drove it from New York City to Seattle. I took my Model T over the Rocky Mountains. 20 horsepower engine is what's inside of this, but it's enough power to go over that, or even worse, I went over the Appalachian Mountains, which are New York territory, and they're a lot steeper, shorter lived, but this car can handle that. You can see that it has a lot of things that are built into it that are very, very effective in terms of its running. You'll learn that the electrical system inside of a Model T is different than all of these other cars, and include different than any other car that anybody was making. All cars need to create electricity for the spark plug, for that to ignite the fuels that are inside of it. And this is the first time that they took and combined the flywheel and the magneto together, okay? And it's inside the engine, inside of oil. It was so effective. They didn't have to have a lot of these other kinds of things that were really complicated, and it made the car much easier to work with. This is the first time that we have a removable head in any car in the world. Removable head made 2 important contributions to the automobile. 1, it was easier to manufacture, and 2, it was easier to maintain. So immediately it was one that people looked at it. And all the manufacturers, the other manufacturers thought, you know what, it's going to leak, and it's going to leak compression, it's going to leak water, it's going to make a mess. And basically what Henry did is he put a really innovative gasket, that's in there. They clamped it down and worked great. And what happened in the other car manufacturers after this car came out? They went with removable heads as well because people could see that that's the way it was going to work. It has a planetary gear transmission, has 2 forward speeds and 1 reverse. And all these are controlled by bands that are on a transmission. And it was pretty easy to learn how to drive. It doesn't drive like anything at all like the cars like you and I would drive today. There's 3 pedals on the floor. Immediately you look at that and say, which one's the gas? And the answer is none of them.
Right,
okay?
right.
The gas is actually on the column up there. There's a couple levers up there. But the pedals on the floor, certainly, one is a brake, sort of. This car doesn't have brakes. It's a caliper on the transmission that squeezes it. And another one is a clutch, sort of, that you press it in to be in low gear and let it up in high gear. And the middle pedal is actually reverse. So it took a little while to do it. I think it takes us longer to train somebody now how to drive a Model T than probably it did originally.
Probably.
People didn't know how to do that, right? So anyway, it's a really, really interesting car. One of the other innovations that we see on this car is these headlights are pretty profound. These are not electrical headlights, it's actually a gas. And over on the side over here, there's a canister that creates a flammable gas, and it is all rubber hosed up to these headlights, and that's where we can start that gas running, and then pretty soon, after about 10 or 15 minutes, we can actually light those headlights, and you can see at least 10 or 12 feet.
Oh.
It's pretty good.
So no more walking in front of the car with a lantern, right?
Well said, Mike. Well said. Yes, yes. So this Model T now, with its 22 horsepower and its incredible transmission that it has and all the rest of the provisions inside of here, make it a pretty darn reasonable car to get. We're also going to start introducing enclosed bodies because in the wintertime we still have some challenges here in Michigan and on many other places in the country and the world. But we're going to now start introducing some enclosed cars, and you'll see that we have a lot of those upstairs as well.
What would this one cost, you think?
This is a $850 car. You will have to pay a little bit more for certain kinds of things on it if you were to like it. By the way, it doesn't come, there's no fuel pump, no oil pump, no water pump. There's no speedometer unless you pay an extra $50 for it, okay? There's no windshield wiper, there's no heater, there's no gas gauge. Okay, there are so many things that are missing from this car that you and I would have an expectation of today. But in the day that this was produced, those are the things that Henry didn't have to put out. What he's going to learn, though, as he's making this car, and by the way, he's going to make 15 million of these cars altogether because the world goes crazy in terms of being able to buy a car like this for $850 is really, really pretty profound. So basically, those other competitors that are going to start emerging, Chevrolet being a good one, Dodge Brothers eventually in the mid-teens, et cetera, they're going to start adding some of those other features. And that is going to be taking some of that market share away from Henry. So it's going to drive Henry to start including some of those things in his cars. One of the other things that's really amazing about this, we were talking about the steering wheel. And so far we've seen the steering wheel on the right-hand side, and this is on the left. And we have to question in terms of why did that change occur? Why did Henry do that? Sometimes we give credit to Clara for that, by the way. I shared with you that we didn't have paved roads. Paved roads, by the way, the first concrete paved road, do you know where that was located?
Probably Woodward.
Woodward Avenue, yes, in Detroit, between 6 and 7 Mile, okay, is where that was located. So all these we were driving on dirt. And there's horses still like mad inside of there. So what's inside of that dirt? But, yep, I used to be an elementary school teacher, so I say caca or manure. I guess that'd be acceptable. And what happened is when the steering wheel was over there, and in the United States, we drive on the right-hand side, right? So that would put Clara over here on the left-hand side of this car if she was getting out on a right-hand, had a right-hand steering wheel, which meant that she had to get out in the middle of the road where the maximum amount of mud and caca are, exactly, okay? So one of the notions is that it would be more gentlemanly for the gentleman to drive on the left side of the car and let the woman get out over on the side of the road where we don't have all the mud and caca. Right. There's it's really kind of interesting. So really what happened with a lot of these other cars is with the steering wheel over on the right side, that's what Europe was doing. And in Europe, as we know, they typically drove on the other side of the road, okay? We know why they did that too, by the way, but they didn't change after all the knights with their armor left the roads. And the bottom line is that we know that in Michigan or in the United States, it's also better to drive on this side because you're now near the center line of the road. And if you want to drive safely, you want to have a good idea where those other passing cars are.
True.
So it really became a really neat advantage. And then all the cars after the Model T were now switching over to being on the left side. Another innovation.
All from Kaka.
Well said, well said.
Hey, we were having so much fun here and saw so many things. We're going to continue this on into the next episode. Okay, I'll get out of the car.
Safe is one of the biggest magnets.
So do you want me to turn around and?
No. While you guys have this conversation, let's have this conversation. You can talk about things, and then we'll get a shot afterwards, the B-roll, and then we'll.
So we shouldn't go and turn around and look at what he's talking about. We're
Not
just.
unless he's gonna let you in.
You can't go in it.